a man that was born into one of the most ruthless clans in the entire Jujutsu world, where power, cursed energy, and strength were the only things that decided the value of a human being. While the Zenin clan was known for its powerful fighters and their immense amount of influence on Jujutsu politics, all strength, in their eyes, was not created equally. The Zenins valued strength above all else, but they only valued a certain kind of strength, power that derived itself from cursed energy and high-level curse techniques. If you were among the greatest of your clan, you were favored and treated with respect by some and contempt by others. If you were only capable of the bare minimum, you were either sent into grueling training sessions or bound to a life of slavery. But if you were deemed hopeless, unworthy of the family name, then you were tossed aside to be eaten alive in a dark room full of cursed spirits. Yet to everyone's surprise, one man who was thrown into the darkness came out alive. The man with absolutely zero curse energy to his name. And that man's name was Toji Zenin. Throughout the series, he's either been referenced directly or indirectly as one of the most powerful fighters that the series had to offer, with him being the ultimate picture of strength in the eyes of Naoya Zenin alongside Satoru Gojo, with Naoya being a fighter that was hailed as a genius among the Zenin clan even as a small child, and was someone that was expected to obtain power great enough to become the next head of the Zenin clan, before even remotely beginning to realize his full abilities, along with being somewhat of a bar set narratively for Maki Zenin once she became able to awaken her full potential. The powers of Toji Zenin were something that broke the status quo of the Jujutsu world. In the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, sorcerers are typically categorized based on their abilities in combat. This is done with a grade system, with grades 4 through special grade, with special grade being the highest. The grades themselves aren't indicative of what a sorcerer's equivalent would be in terms of cursed spirits, and is actually one level below that. So a grade 1 sorcerer should be able to easily exercise grade 1 curses, seeing as their strength would be more on par with special grade cursed spirits. The level of strength granted to Toji through heavenly restriction is something that isn't recognized by both the Zenin clan and the Jujutsu system as a whole, which is why a grade for Toji never was and never will be officially assigned. Toji not being a sorcerer would also exclude him from all conversations and statements that group the majority of characters together, with examples being Naobito being the second fastest sorcerer alive and so forth. According to Gege Akutami in the official Jujutsu Kaisen handbook, Toji began to distance himself from the Zenin clan at a very early age, with him often being thrown into a room full of cursed spirits as a small child, which we would later find out in chapter 149 was filled with multiple grade 2 curses. Yet Toji was able to consistently defeat these enemies even as a young boy, let alone as a fully grown adult. The Zenin clan's insistence on strength being the measure of the value of a human being causes them to not only target each other for the sake of their own ambitions, but also to devalue and even kill their own family if they don't see them as being gifted enough in combat. Maki Zenin, who early on in the series was almost like an incomplete version of Toji, was someone that fell victim to this. While Maki had a similar heavenly restriction to Toji, due to the circumstances of her birth, she wasn't able to awaken her full potential until later on in the series. Although the things that she is able to accomplish while even only being at a fraction of Toji's power do help to demystify just how strong he really was. Pre-awakened Maki Zenin is able to casually catch, dodge, and counterattack bullets at very close range, and was stated by Miwa to be able to easily defeat grade 2 curses at the very beginning of the series, something that Toji was capable of doing as a small child, let alone Maki's age of 17. In a world that shunned those with low curse energy as being weak, and a clan that saw fit to sentence such people to death, just the mere reminder of Toji's presence was enough to send Ogi Zenin into a fit of body-shaking fear, causing him to panic like a cornered animal, with Toji's memory alone being something that shook him down to his core more than a decade after his death. Fast forwarding to his fight with Satoru Gojo, someone whose birth literally changed the balance of the entire Jujutsu world, Gojo being an opponent so terrifying that even a sorcerer with 1,000 years of knowledge and combat experience considers him to be impossible to beat in a head-on fight, who causes all levels of cursed spirits and curse users to hide in fear just because of his mere existence, is then confidently taken on by Toji in a one-on-one scenario, with the only planning being done beforehand revolving around avoiding detection from the Six Eyes themselves. During their encounter, Toji is able to dodge blue at close and point-blank range regardless of Gojo having a direct line of sight to attack him, while also covering enough ground to completely leave the area, with Gojo being hailed as the fastest sorcerer alive, even being stated to be above the head of the Zenin clan, Naobito Zenin. This is the only time in the entire series that we've seen anyone dodge blue, period, let alone at point-blank range, with all other opponents of Gojo being instantly mangled as soon as the technique is activated. Yet Toji is able to completely outmaneuver Gojo and his abilities to the point of blatant confusion. After realizing that Toji has zero curse energy and that his speed comes purely from physical prowess, Gojo realizes just how much of a threat Toji truly is. Sorcerers track their opponent's movements by analyzing the flow of their curse energy. A less experienced sorcerer is easier to read and to react to because they telegraph their next move by concentrating the bulk of their curse energy into one spot before an attack. More experienced sorcerers are significantly harder to fight against because the flow of their curse energy is much more even and harder to respond to. Toji, however, has no curse energy at all, so his movements can't be tracked using conventional means, giving him a massive boost against Jujutsu sorcerers and curse spirits by being completely unpredictable. Once Gojo realizes that he can bypass Toji's anti-tracking capabilities by tracking the cursed spirit wrapped around his body, he feels completely overwhelmed, with Toji moving so quickly that he can't even pinpoint a precise attack, and has no choice but to resort to detonating the entire area. Even with this being the case, he's still unable to even hit or see Toji, who's one step ahead of him by releasing a multitude of low-grade curses to block Gojo's vision. Taking advantage of his ridiculous levels of speed, he blitzes Gojo before he can even defend himself, finishing him by stabbing him in the throat, bypassing what would be an otherwise impenetrable defense. He does this by utilizing the inverted Spear of Heaven to neutralize Gojo's Infinity, which infinitely slows down anything that tries to damage him. The inverted Spear of Heaven being a curse tool that neutralizes all curse techniques on contact, being exponentially more dangerous in the hands of someone as physically gifted as Toji Fushiguro. This is all done while surpassing Gojo's detection of the inverted Spear of Heaven's curse energy, and the razor-sharp instincts that can detect Toji even when he's unarmed. A callback to their earlier meeting in chapter 71. This would lead to Toji claiming victory over Satoru Gojo, the man who would be called the greatest sorcerer alive just a few chapters later. Moving on to his true objective, he infiltrates the Tomb of the Star in order to assassinate the Star Plasma Vessel, where he faces his last form of opposition, Suguru Geto. Suguru being the only sorcerer at the time who was constantly shown as a close rival to Satoru Gojo, and was even believed to have the potential to defeat Gojo himself by Mei, someone who's known both of them for a very significant period of time, whose curse technique was so deadly that he had the power to defeat an opponent with boundless curse energy and topple the entire Jujutsu fighting force, which included Gojo, as long as he took the proper approach according to Kenjaku. The same man who was immediately categorized as a special grade curse the moment he went rogue. Even with Toji recognizing the potential of his opponent, he saw him as being so insignificant that Suguru's attempts to blatantly murder him were less important than finishing his own monologue. Suguru then summons the Rainbow Dragon in order to kill Toji, which he casually dodges with zero effort. Toji then immediately exercises it with a single hit where he slices straight through the entire body of the Rainbow Dragon without even remotely straining himself, with the Rainbow Dragon being the most physically durable curse in Suguru's possession out of literal thousands, all of which were specifically captured for their unique capabilities inside and outside of combat. Meanwhile, Toji completely obliterates it without even needing to use the inverted Spear of Heaven. Geto then counters this by summoning a special grade that immediately casts an innate domain with a special condition, while also having all of Toji's limbs be surrounded by invisible blades on all sides. Due to Toji's intelligence, he instantly sees through all of this and is able to counter and dispel the special grade's domain before Suguru can even take advantage of his position. While Suguru attempts to catch Toji off guard by disabling his weapons cache, something that Toji even claims he's an idiot for trying to do at close range by the way, he blitzes Suguru by both defeating him and exercising his special grade curse spirit at the exact same time before either one of them can even react to his movements. After his reanimation during the Shibuya arc, we see him face off against one of the most durable special grade curse spirits shown at this point in the series, with that curse spirit being Dagon. Dagon's durability is significant to point out for multiple reasons. Being one of the disaster curses, Dagon's original 3 opponents were Supreme Special Grade 1 Sorcerer Nabito Zenin, Grade 1 Sorcerer Kento Nanami, and Semi-Grade 1 Pre-Awakened Maki. Nabito being one of the strongest sorcerers that this era had to offer, while also being hailed as the fastest sorcerer alive behind Satoru Gojo, with Kento Nanami being a character who can swing well above his weight class by creating and targeting an opponent's weak points, and Maki being an incomplete, much weaker version of Toji that hadn't fully awakened her powers yet. Due to the definitions behind the Jujutsu grade system, these characters being anywhere between Semi and Supreme Grade 1 should give them all a level of battle power comparable to a special grade curse spirit individually. Yet even with this being the case, Dagon is not only able to have the potential to one-shot Maki, but also tank hits from all three of them without getting a single scratch, with Nanami viewing Dagon as something like a raid boss with infinite HP. The fight against Dagon becomes even more hopeless after he activates his domain expansion, where he gets a buff to every single one of his combat-based stats as stated in chapter 15. So this Dagon is actually much stronger than the variant that was already deemed impossible to do damage to, let alone kill by Nanami. Yet the second that Dagon encounters Toji, just a handful of attacks are enough to make him believe he's on the verge of dying, panicking about the idea of him possibly losing to a human with zero cursed energy. Toji begins to completely embarrass Dagon, performing at levels that he didn't even believe should be humanly possible, by blitzing him consistently inside of his own domain, crushing his most powerful Shikigami in a single blow, and leaving Dagon with no possible win conditions other than desperately hoping to reactivate his guaranteed hit. This is the same special grade who was just about to absolutely slaughter 3 sorcerers with comparable power to special grade curses themselves, who was now absolutely helpless in front of the monster that is Toji Fushiguro. Even statements about Naobito Zenin being the fastest sorcerer alive wouldn't apply to Toji because Toji was never a sorcerer to begin with, and it's actually demonstrated multiple times that he should indeed be faster than Naobito, if not straight up more powerful in general. During his initial fight with Dagon, Naobito has some very impressive speed feats, such as consistently blitzing Dagon and bouncing him around like a ping pong ball before he can even complete a thought. I've seen people try to downplay Naobito by counting the moments inside of Dagon's domain as anti-feats, and this wouldn't be accurate for a few different reasons. The first point I've seen people try to bring up is that Dagon can now blitz Naobito inside of his domain because of the punch that he landed right after the domain started. Although this wouldn't be valid, as Naobito was basically blind to Dagon's movements due to the onslaught of Shikigami that were blocking his view, where he later confirms that he couldn't even see in the very next panel. The second being that Dagon can now dodge Naobito on his second appearance, although this is just moments after Naobito loses an entire arm, something that was directly stated to be a massive nerf to his speed just a few chapters later. So making a comparison between a previously healthy Naobito and a fully healthy Dagon, and an amplified Dagon versus a nerfed Naobito wouldn't actually be consistent. A much more direct comparison would be comparing Naobito's power and speed feat in chapter 107 against Toji's power and speed feat in chapter 110. In chapter 107, Naobito, Nanami, and Maki all attack Dagon's water shield at the exact same time. Yet Naobito is the only one that's capable of piercing the water shield with his bare hands, while Maki and Nanami fail to do so even while being armed with weapons. Yet the exact moment that Naobito's fist pierces the shield, Dagon is able to react by fleeing into the sky, completely avoiding the impact. You then take that same Dagon and amplify all of his physical capabilities, which would include his speed, and have Toji perform the exact same feat while being able to tag Dagon before he's able to react, regardless of being far stronger than the variant that faced Naobito before. Playful Cloud, which is the curse tool that was used for this, is the only tool that doesn't have an embedded curse technique, and it's stated multiple times that the strength of the tool relies solely on the strength of the user, acting more so as an extension of that fighter's physical capabilities. Even with a weapon having more reach than, say, someone's arm, for example, a Dagon who is much stronger and faster than before, failing to react to an attack that he could see coming, to then immediately start doubting his ability to win afterwards, should comfortably place Toji above Naobito when it comes to combat ability. During his brief scuffle with Megumi, he forces his son outside before he can even register what just happened to him. The feeling of being overwhelmed by the speed of his opponent is something that Megumi compares to Sukuna himself, who he fought back in chapter 9. Now, I've seen arguments saying that because Sukuna was only at 15% of his maximum strength in chapter 9, comparing him to a full-powered Toji wouldn't actually make any sense. This would mainly be due to a 5% Sukuna being completely fondled by the least serious Gojo we've ever seen in the series. Yet him only getting 10% stronger would put him at the same speed as a fully powered Toji Fushiguro. I've also seen counter-arguments about how Sukuna is able to blitz special grade curses at only 10%, with references to other events throughout the story. I'm not necessarily going to take either side of the debate here, but if you want to take that statement at face value, then there it is. After Maki's defeat at the hands of her father Ogi Zenin, Maki is thrown into the same room of cursed spirits that Toji was often thrown into as a child. After awakening her full potential thanks to Mai's sacrifice, just her aura alone is enough to send her father into a panic that you would normally only see from a cornered animal. But it wasn't purely the threat of Maki on its own that had him fearing for his life. There was a fear that once controlled him long ago, the fear of a ghost that he could never defeat from his own past, the fear of the most unstoppable man that he had ever met, Toji Fushiguro. where previously he saw fit to attack Maki with just the basics of his technique and Falling Blossom emotion. Just the pure reminder of Toji's presence caused him to immediately unleash everything that he had in terms of his curse technique, only to be cut down before he could even finish speaking. Now possessing a power that was comparable to Toji, Maki began to slaughter the entire Zenin clan without any mercy whatsoever, starting by hard blitzing and one-shotting her father, a supreme grade 1 sorcerer, and then moving straight to fighting her former squad, the Kukuru unit. The Kukuru unit being a squad with over 20 members, comprised of members of the Zenin clan that had no curse techniques. The Zenin clan separates its members by a strength hierarchy, with the head of the clan being the strongest, the Hei being for the members that are semi-grade 1 and above, and the Kukuru unit being the absolute last option to avoid a life of slavery. Because of this, it would be safe to say that on average, a member of the Kukuru unit should be grade 2 and below, with its members being stated to put through grueling martial arts training on a regular basis. With Maki's strength level at the beginning of the series being at least that of a grade 2 sorcerer, it wouldn't be too far-fetched to say that at least some of the members of this unit should be roughly comparable to the Maki that we saw at the Kyoto Exchange event. Yet a fully awakened Maki Zenin is able to murder 20 of them at the exact same time without getting a single scratch, and not even appearing to be fatigued afterward. She would then go on to fight the Hei, which as mentioned earlier is comprised of sorcerers that rank from semi-grade 1 all the way up to supreme grade 1, with the latter being the leader of the group, Naoya Zenin, along with Jinshi Zenin, Toji's own brother. It's during this fight that we see the pure grip of fear that Toji held over the Zenin clan even a decade after his own death. Even with the Hei being the strongest members of the most ruthless clan in Japan, the moment that they noticed that Maki had become like Toji, they knew that it was the beginning of the end, stating that the Zenin clan itself only still existed because of Toji's whim, which for clarification means that he would have still slaughtered the entire Zenin clan while a much younger Naobito was still the clan's head. The fight that ensues after this is a complete slaughter, with Maki taking attacks from their most powerful fighters without even flinching, and breaking any kind of control that they attempted to have over her body, with her straight up one-shotting every single fighter that she encounters. These fighters being semi-grade 1 and higher should at least be roughly comparable to special grade curses in strength, with Jinshi being someone that should be able to fight some of the higher tiers of special grades as a supreme grade 1 sorcerer similar to Naoya Zenin. These fighters are all defeated in quick succession in the most brutal ways possible, all while Maki is already heavily injured from her first encounter with Ogi. Keeping in mind that due to his highly calculated nature and his incredibly potent arsenal of cursed tools, had Toji been the one to execute this attack while he was alive, it likely would have been far worse. Maki's final fight with Naoya Zenin, the leader of the Hei, and at that moment the strongest remaining member of the Zenin clan, is actually far more one-sided than it seems at first glance. As stated in chapter 151, she was already heavily injured and fatigued after suffering injuries and blood loss from her fight with Ogi, on top of tanking multiple attacks from the Hei's curse techniques. Yet even with this being the case, Maki is shown being able to keep up with Naoya in hand-to-hand combat, and instead of panicking due to his power and speed, is confident enough in her own abilities while fighting a fully powered Naoya Zenin that she remained completely calm, choosing to count his movements. She actually spent the majority of the fight figuring out his curse technique from scratch, and nearly murders him with a single punch to the face after that was completed. A fully healthy Toji, who would likely have a much more working knowledge of how projection sorcery functions, would be able to make much quicker work of a similar fight, especially when you consider that knowing his enemy before attacking is typically his approach to begin with, which can be seen when he strategizes against both the Limitless and the Six Eyes for Satoru Gojo, and has a working knowledge of curse spirit manipulation for Suguru Geto. The memory of Toji's strength was actually enough to cause Naoya to have a complete mental crisis mid-battle with Maki, as he felt the need to destroy her to reaffirm his own identity. This is largely because of 1, the fact that he's always looked down on Maki and looked at himself as far superior to his peers, and 2, because he looks to Toji Zenin as the ultimate picture of strength in the Jujutsu world, right alongside Satoru Gojo. While you could argue that this was just a child's interpretation of where Toji should stand in terms of his strength, it's worth noting that Naoya was considered to be a genius among the Zenin clan even as a small child. And regardless of his countless years of training, educating himself, and gaining a larger scope of knowledge about both Toji and the entirety of the Jujutsu world, he didn't even consider putting people like his own father Naobito, Suguru Geto, assuming that he ever heard of him, or even Yuta Kotsu, who he was visibly afraid of, in that same category. Even circling back to his death at the hands of Satoru Gojo in chapter 75, it's entirely possible that Toji could have actually won this fight if he had a working knowledge of Hollow Purple, which is an advantage that Gojo openly states before unleashing his ultimate attack, as all of the strategies that he considers beforehand for every single move in Gojo's arsenal turn out to be completely valid. Being caught off guard by his complete lack of awareness by a move that could end his life in a single hit is ultimately what did him in the end. After his death by the man that would be hailed as the greatest sorcerer alive, what he was able to accomplish was so unsettling that Gojo chose to destroy his most powerful weapon, the Inverted Spear of Heaven, just in case another threat like Toji would ever rise again. That is all we have today for Toji Fushiguro, but there is a very strong possibility of more Toji videos coming in the future, with more power scaling videos to come as well. So if you like what you just heard, make sure to like and subscribe, and as always, have a great day, guys.